The Adirondacks have never stayed the same for very long, you know, in the grand sweep of time.
I would imagine that these were vast forests with little understory, probably a lot of beaver that were able to do what beavers do naturally, be the architect of the landscape. Because of that, there was a lot of early growth as well, places where beavers create dams and then blockages, and that creates these willow and alder areas that are ideal for moose. Large forests with huge diameter trees.
Of course, the wildlife would have been a lot different. You would have had timber wolves and mountain lions and moose, not as much of the deer as you have now. The main attraction for European Americans early on here was, a lot of it was the forest, because the forest products were a lot more important, you could say, for society back then. When people were heating with wood as well as coal. You know, you weren't having, like your ships were made of wood more than steel, so you need the masts and the planking for that. So it was a pretty extractive, intensive operation, and along with the fires that would happen from the charcoal and the sparks coming out of the coal-fired train smokestacks and things like that, boy, if you came here in the late 1800s, it would be unrecognizable.
Moose were here when the first colonists arrived. Their populations were quite healthy. Through hunting and overhunting and harvesting and depletion of the forest, the moose population slowly and steadily declined. And the last moose was shot in 1861 in the Adirondacks. Moose are an icon for the northern forest. They are our charismatic megafauna, meaning people can really relate to them. They know what a moose looks like. When people come to the Adirondacks, there's a part of them that wants to see a moose. They rival the beaver in their ability to change the forest. They eat 40 pounds of vegetation a day. And so without moose here, the ecosystem is fundamentally changed. They were pretty much extirpated from all of New York, all of Vermont, all of New Hampshire, and there was just a little small population of moose in Maine. And slowly, during the last century, the populations have rebounded in all of those states. In 1980, the first bull moose was seen in the Adirondacks again, after nearly 100-year hiatus.
The moose are coming back on their own, so that's a success story. Sometimes when you want to reintroduce a species, it's controversial. So I like it when a species comes back on its own, like the moose are. The flip side of that is I'm more nervous driving down the road at night when there are moose around to hit.
We started looking at moose in about 2001. At that time, we used an assessment called the landscape species approach to select a suite of species that is most representative of the Adirondack Park. And moose, because of their need for both upland habitats and riparian areas, wetland areas, they came out as one of the top species. And so we were interested in coming up with a way to monitor the moose population or learn a bit more about our moose in the Adirondacks that used a non-invasive technique. And by non-invasive, I mean that as the researcher, we don't need to handle the animals at all. We don't even really need to see the animals. We contacted Working Dogs for Conservation. They use dogs to find scat of animals. What we will be doing with the scat that we've collected so far in the Adirondacks is looking at the genetics. We'd like to identify the moose down to the individual, and we'll do that by obtaining a DNA profile of moose, or a genetic marker of moose, so that we can understand the numbers of moose in the Adirondacks, whether they're male or female, which tells us a little bit about the population structure and how fast it might be growing. And we're also really interested in how related Adirondack moose are to other moose in the Northeast. Are the moose in the Adirondacks the result of a few moose dispersing back in the 1980s and then a population just growing from those moose? Or are the moose in the Adirondacks the result of moose coming in and out and coming in and out, and it's a much more connected metapopulation structure here in the Northeast? If moose in the Adirondacks are dependent upon this broader Northeast moose population, then that would indicate that we should look to how well the Adirondacks is connected to these other places in the Northeast. How well are we connected to Canada? How well are we connected to Vermont?
It's important to remember how we're actually enjoying a green island in a sea of development that is pretty much engulfing most of the planet, and places like this are all the more precious as time goes on. And if we take them for granted, I just hope we don't do so enough to run the risk of losing what we have.
And that's why we need science to understand, have a better idea of what that number is, and have a better idea of how that number might change over the next decade, 2 decades. Because a large population of moose in the Adirondacks could mean big changes for the forest. And maybe with the moose returning on its own, natural predators will begin to return.
Basically, it's going to depend on us, what we decide to protect and how effectively, and how much we control the things that we allow to come in.
Moose are part of the ecosystem. They're part of the functional ecosystem here in the Adirondacks. They were here historically. Humans have altered the land, and to have moose and other species return to this area just indicates that humans and wilderness can coexist. And to me, that's a great thing.
The one thing you can be sure of, the one constant, is that the Adirondacks will continue to change. And it's anybody's guess as to whether it's a way you would like to see it or not. Sometimes I try to comfort myself in that sense by saying people tend to become attached to things they're used to and what they kind of grew up in, and I don't think I would change the Adirondacks very much from what it is now, maybe because I love it the way it is. And I can only hope that future generations will see the new face of the Adirondacks, whatever it may be, and cherish it as much as we do now.